So I've talked a lot about some of the things that we've been through in the last few years as a family. I've talked about us recognizing that my husband's family, a lot of them were very abusive, his parents and others who supported his parents. And then I've talked about how after going no contact with them, we started to recognize that there were similar dynamics in my family of origin. And that eventually led to us 2 years ago, roughly, going no contact with my family, with my parents, one of my brothers, and leaving the church that we were a part of. And so I've talked about some of the losses that brought us. There were a lot of losses. We lost our employment. We lost most of our community, most of our village. What village we did have, most of it was tied up there. We lost a lot of friends. We had to move because things were just so bad where we were. And there was just a lot of grief that we had to walk through together as a family and then individually as well. I wanted to share with you some encouragement, share with you some of the ways that we're seeing healing and growth and improvement and things getting better, because I think it's really easy, especially when you're just so tired and you're going through so much, to wonder if it's even worth it. And that was certainly one of the things that kept us where we were for so long. We had just blocked out of our brain the option of leaving, the option of discontinuing these relationships at a close level. That wasn't an option in our mind. And it kept us there a lot longer than it needed to, because we felt like we had no guarantees once we left those places and those relationships. And people who are in high control religious groups, people who are in dysfunctional families, that is a narrative that is pushed on you all the time you're in those groups, that if you leave, no one's going to support you. If you leave, you've got nothing. And it feels like that when you're trying to decide whether you should leave or not. And so I wanted to share this video as a way of encouraging those who might be in that space and wondering if it's worth it, wondering if it's ever going to get better. And I just want you to know, I don't feel like we're fully healed yet. We've been out of this about 2 years, and my healing process started before we left the Plymouth Brethren group we were a part of, and it started even before we went no contact with my own family. That process began before, and it has continued, and it's intensified the last couple of years when we got out of these places. But I wanted to share with you ways that we're seeing growth, ways that we're seeing healing, and whether 2 years out from maybe the crises points that we were in 2 years ago, what my experience has been. Because I also think it's important, after sharing all these difficult things that we've lived through, to emphasize that there is hope on the other side of it. You can survive it, and we are still here. We're still together as a family. My husband and I's marriage has probably never been stronger, never been healthier. And our relationship with our kids as parents has, even though we've had so much grief and so many apologies and so many amends to make with our children, our relationship with our kids is stronger than ever. Their relationships with each other are stronger than ever, generally speaking. And so I want to share that, because I know there are others who need to know that there is hope and that you can heal. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. So one of the things that I want to emphasize that we've gained from our healing process and from leaving the dysfunctional families that we were part of and leaving the toxic church that we were part of is the loss of family members. Both my husband and I are no contact with our parents currently, no contact with what living grandparents we have, and no contact with one or several siblings. Both have experienced that, as well as, extended family, cousins, those who have deliberately chosen to protect the people who were being abusive towards us, and some who weren't protecting them, but simply have had to limit contact because it is a fragile situation. And so I don't judge I want to say right now, I don't judge any of our family members, cousins, extended relatives, people who don't feel free to reach out to us and be as close to us as they can. That's their choice to make. And I don't judge them, because it kept me there for a long time too. But we did lose a lot of the family that we were born into. And that was a very difficult thing to handle. It was really hard, and I've talked about that in some of my other videos. But I want to say that God has surprised us with new people and with people who have reached in and loved us, even though they didn't have to. We weren't related to them, we weren't connected to them in any way. But there have been new people who've come into our lives in the last few years. I think about women in my support group that I started going to even before we left the church we were a part of, women who helped me to recognize, who were willing to step in and say, hey, your family doesn't seem to be very supportive. They were the women who helped me to see the reality of things. And then they were there when those things required us to take drastic action and to make decisions. And they stayed with me through it. And they reached out to me on a daily basis. Some of them helped financially. Some of them prayed with me. Some of them just let me vent to them when I needed to. And so those women were there for me. And then we started going to a new church. And through this new church in the new area that we're in, that we moved to, we've had so many mentors, so many peers, so many older adults than myself and my husband who have been willing to just pour into us, even though we can't give much back right now, who have just reached in, who have been the stability and the support and the village that we needed, and have stepped in. I think of one couple who has just been incredibly supportive of our kids and always is happy to see them. And when I broke my wrist last Christmas, the wife came over and just stayed with our kids when I had to go into surgery so that my husband could be with me. And the husband's met with my husband several times to just encourage and be there for my husband as he was struggling with some of these things. And these are people who I didn't know 2 years ago when we left the church we were a part of. And yet they have already shown themselves to be so loving and kind and accepting that it's just been possible to go very deep very quickly because they just love on us, and in a way that is without expectation or demand. And that's something that was really new for us, and we didn't expect because we had not really experienced that very much in the previous church we were a part of. We've met new friends. We have peers now, other parents who are close to our age, who have kids close to our kids' age, other families that are walking through this parenting journey. And that was something that we really had none of, almost at all, in the previous church we were a part of. We were the only family with young children at our local gathering. And most of the other families that would have been in our peer group were far spread across different parts of the country, far away. And so there was not really any opportunity to connect with other families who were in the same space we were for the most part. And we were discouraged from seeking those kinds of peers outside of the church we were a part of. And so it's been such a gift to discover that not only are there friends and people who can become brothers and sisters and people who can become nieces and nephews and aunts and uncles and grandparents to us, but to discover that those relationships are even healthier because they're not based on a demand or insistence on agreeing with a certain set of teachings. They're simply based in love and wanting to treat others in a sacrificial and loving way. And so that's something that surprised us, because in our previous toxic church that we were a part of, it was very much, there was very much a fear of people who weren't a part of that group and a thought that they would never be able to give you the kind of support you had where you were. We've just found that's not true, that there are amazing people who God brings into your life to take those support roles that every person needs. Another thing that we gained by leaving the toxic church and the dysfunctional families that we were part of is we did lose a lot of lifelong friends, especially myself, because I had been in that church group for my entire life. And so there were people there who knew me from childhood, which is part of the reason the betrayal of having so few people reach out to me from that group was so huge, because there were people who should have known me better. They'd known me all my life from babyhood, and they just didn't know me well enough, or were not courageous enough to reach out and say, wow, this is a huge decision you've made, and what happened, because we never thought you'd go this way. Like, I didn't have anyone reach out to me like that. Not no one, but I can count on one hand how many people actually reached out and said, wow, something must have really happened for you to take this drastic of an action. But when I left many friends who had been my friends since childhood, and that was really hard. But the good that I've discovered from that is that those who did stay, those who have chosen to connect, even in the midst of this huge crisis we went through, they're like family. I have a few friends I have a couple friends who I've been friends with from childhood, from my high school years, from early college years, and from parent groups I've been a part of. And each of those, there haven't been many friends who stayed with us through those things, but those who have, I wouldn't hesitate to trust my life to them in an instant, because I know they're really there for me. And I hope they know that we're there for them too. And that's the kind of friend I'm trying to be to them as well. And that was something that really is striking about making a huge life choice like we did, is you discover who the real friends are, who the real family is, and it's usually not who you think it is. Sometimes it is, but quite often you discover it's not who you think it's going to be. But those who have stayed with us through this, who are still our friends now, I know they're real friends. The other thing that we've discovered is that the new friends that we're making, we can make friends more carefully and more deliberately. And the friends that we're making now, they're the friends who are okay with growth and change. They're the friends who want to keep improving and keep doing things better. The friends that we're making now are people who don't feel like they've arrived, who aren't resting on the group that they're a part of, or the family that they're a part of, to say that they are doing the right thing. No, they're constantly looking for how to improve and how to do things better in a way that is more honoring to God and that more clearly demonstrates Christian love. And those are the kinds of friends I want to have. And so that's been something that it's been a benefit that I hadn't expected, and it's a neat way that, and these are the people who are reaching into our lives now and helping us. And even though they don't know our whole story, even though they haven't walked through all of this with us, they've seen our character and our behavior enough to recognize that they are, like Anne Shirley says in Anne of Green Gables, they're kindred spirits. They're going the same direction in life, and they're just looking for people to walk with them in it. And that's what we have found, and it's been so worthwhile. Another way that we're experiencing healing is the church that we came from was very toxic. And one of the ways that it was toxic was that those who were in leadership, those who were the workers, they were kind of expected to do everything. And that's something you do see quite often, especially in small groups, in small churches, but really in toxic or high control groups, is there's just a few people who are doing most of the work. And if you are one of those persons, if you are a lay minister or we used to call them laboring brothers or laboring sisters, full-time workers. If you're a full-time Christian minister in a lot of these groups, you are the person everybody expects is doing the work. And the problem with that is that quite often, especially the group we were a part of, it was free will offerings we were supported by, so we weren't even making a full-time salary. We took a significant pay cut to go into ministry, and because we didn't have an actual salary, we were simply supported by gifts. And there was this expectation that we were now available to do everything because we didn't have a job, but we weren't paid enough. We weren't given enough to support our family's needs on a regular basis, and we were expected to just be able to do everything. There was no concept of we might need rest time, or we might need to take time off for our mental health, or anything like that. None of that was, because you basically belonged to the church and to people. And so if there was anything to do with church, you were expected to find a way to make sure it was happening, unless it was something someone else really wanted to do. Because of course there are those who are narcissistic even in church spaces, and there were those who were that kind of a narcissistic leader are happy to do the things that gives them praise and accolades. But the hard things that no one's going to see, you're expected to do those as a lay minister, and without adequate support, or even without proper resources for your family's needs. We have, since we started ministry in 2009, we have lived consistently below the poverty line, and yet we hesitated and rarely did we ever look for or accept any government help. And that was directly because people would judge us for needing government help. They would judge us for seeking to get involved with WIC or with SNAP or with any of these government programs to support our family, because that would be seen as a lack of faith, instead of people recognizing that we weren't making enough to cover our own needs. And it's just this toxic wheel of blame. It's always your fault, even when anything that's not happening well is your fault automatically, instead of recognizing that life is complicated and complex, and rarely is anything that happens a single person's fault. But it was easy for people to blame our circumstances on something we were doing wrong, instead of recognizing that we simply weren't being supplied with enough to cover the needs of our family. And yet we were still expected to work more than 60 hours a week, to do anything that needed doing, to be available at all times. It's just a very draining environment. And now we're at a different kind of church, and I don't hesitate to ask for help if I need it, and no one makes me feel bad for needing help. There's even an expectation that everyone's going to need help sometimes, and that if we're not making enough, it's not necessarily our fault. And that's been huge for us, recognizing that poverty isn't, many times, poverty isn't the fault of the person who's poor. It's very easy for there to have been circumstances that occurred that drove them into that state. And that's something new that we've experienced at the church we're a part of now. And it's been so healing for us to realize that at the church we're at now, there's no expectation that a family with young children would be able to do everything. There's an expectation that you're supposed to be taking care of your family. That should be the priority first.